morning. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to Father Brent and Bob Publicover for their technical support. Although I'll be doing most of the talking, that could be very misleading because this is really a joint effort. Lorna has put an immense amount of time and effort into this project, especially in locating scholarly material on the internet. Let's start with a definition. What is a hymn? The answer is not as straightforward as you might think. The Greek word hymnos means a religious song or poem in praise of a god or a god, designed to be sung. Hymns characteristically have verses that rhyme, and non-biblical texts. Even though we speak loosely in ordinary conversation about hymns, ones we like and ones we don't like, and so forth, strictly speaking, the hymn is the text, the words. The music is called the hymn tune. This makes using the word hymn potentially confusing, so I'll try to distinguish between words and music so that you know what I'm talking about. Some hymnals have no music. For example, Newton and Cooper's Only Hymns, from which we get several famous hymns, Oh, for a Closer Walk with God, Amazing Grace, which is arguably the most popular hymn in the country. However those texts were used, whether as spoken as devotions by the congregation in Olney, or sung to traditional tunes, of which they had several, we don't know about that, but the music we associate with those hymns was added later. We started this project with a general question. How did the 11 Advent hymns we plan to explore end up in the hymnal 1982? Where did the words come from? Where did the music come from? How and when did the words and the music get joined together? Our first two hymns, which we'll cover today, are Hymn 60, Creator of the Stars of Night, and Hymn 56, O Come, Emmanuel. Two hymns rooted in chant. There will be visuals of these hymns, including the relevant pages from our hymnal, so not to worry if you don't have a hymnal at home. When we first began discussing this, Father Brent asked, when did congregational hymn singing begin? A very good question. The simple answer is in the Reformation, that is, the 16th century, which did mark the beginning of congregational hymn singing as we know it. This went along with the translation of liturgy into the vernacular, the language of the people, especially in Lutheran Germany and Calvinist Geneva. So stay tuned for our next two sessions when we'll cover those two areas. There were some predecessors of full-blown congregational singing. Of course, we have the background of the synagogue where all the early Christians came from. St. Paul talks about singing hymns, psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. We have the reference in both Mark and Matthew to the Last Supper, where it clearly says when they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. We don't know exactly what the hymn was, but we have some ideas about that. But the point is they were singing hymns. St. Ambrose, a 4th century figure, is considered the father of Latin hymnody, but the hymns that he and his successors wrote were sung by religious communities, in other words, monks and nuns, as part of their daily worship, and not by the people. Of the early pre-Reformation hymns in the language of the people, the Italian Laudi Spirituali are worth noting because they were part of the 13th century Franciscan movement, okay? And we are St. Francis Church, so I just thought I'd point that out. Anyway, okay, let me stop talking for a few minutes Does anyone have any questions at this point, that anything you want a clarification of, or anything like that?
Feel free.
I see pleasant faces, but no questions. That's all right.
Okay.
We'll just go ahead then. Considering the subject for today, let's start with another definition, this of Gregorian chant you've all heard about. Gregorian chant is the vast repertory of pure melody historically employed by the Roman Catholic Church in its liturgy. I say historically because Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, changed a lot of that in recommending the vernacular. But it has been over hundreds of years the repertory of pure melody used by the Roman Catholic Church. Despite our cherished Anglican tradition of accompanied chant, Gregorian chant is monophonic, that is to say, is one-line music, pure melody. It was probably codified under Pope Gregory II in the 8th century, and that's presumably why we call it Gregorian chant. But you have to remember there were centuries of singing, of chanting before that. Okay, let's turn to our visuals. Visual 1. This is a scan from one of the several chant books we have in our cellar in Arkansas. So a guy who was, I did my dissertation in chant. So anyway, this is a 20th century edition of what's called the Antifinale Monasticum. In other words, the monastic antiphon. It's a book containing the music of all services other than the Mass, the so-called offices, other than the Mass. You see there it says proprium de tempore. That refers to the time in the liturgical year. Certain chants are proper to certain times, and you're used to that because we operate on that same system. Below that it says tempore adventus. That means obviously Advent. And then a little bit below that you have ad vesperas, which refers to Vespers, the office or the service to which first chant pertains, is included in it. On the second page of your visual there, on the second item on the page, you will see Conditor Almae, the first piece we're discussing. And guess what? It's labeled hymnus. It is a hymn. Notice that the notes are square, and the staff has only 4 lines, we're used to 5. This kind of square notation was first used back in the 12th century and is still used in liturgical books today. The clef sign, that little thing at the beginning, indicates C, just the way our clefs indicate certain notes, G and F. That indicates C, so this piece starts on E. And we'll be singing this later, but I guess not. We'll soon be singing this, but not from this particular score. Okay, moving on to Visual 2. This is the same chant from Salisbury. In the Anglican tradition, many melodies are from the use of sarum, sarum being an abbreviation of the Latin word for Salisbury. The sarum chants are adaptations of the Roman ones. Basically, hard to describe, but more elaborate than those of the Roman Rite, and they became dearly beloved among English-speaking and English-worshipping people as early as the 13th century, and they lasted for the use of sarum lasted for some 300 years. Now, on this score, you'll notice that the clef looks a little different. In fact, it indicates F this time, so the piece starts on E, as we said, but the staff is set up a little differently. We're going to sing, what did we decide? 1, 2, 5, and 6.
1, 2, 5, and 6.
Okay, we'll sing a little bit of this. Can you give me an E? Okay.
Okay. This is the French teacher talking. Okay. If you're old enough, as we are, to have had to take Latin in high school, you'll be able to follow along a bit. And even if you've never studied Latin, verse 6 is full of words closely related to English. Because of the Norman conquest in 1066, when William the Conqueror imposed French, a Romance language, on the inhabitants of England, 60% of English vocabulary is derived from Latin. So we both were old enough to study Latin in school. Bob probably was too. Yes, he nods yes. So we are going to sing this now from the Latin score as if we were monks.
That's an E, okay. Conditor a me siderum, aeterna lux credentium, Christe Redemptor Dominum, exaudi preces supplicum. Qui condolens interitu, mortis perire seculum, salvat mundi laquidum, donans reis remedium.
5, okay.
Te deprecamur agie, venture iudex seculi, conserva nos in regnore, hostis a telo perfidi. And this is the one with the words you'll be able to catch even if you haven't had Latin. Laus honor virtus gloria, Deo Patri et Filio, Sancto simul Paraclito, in sempiterna saecula. Amen.
And Carlton forgot to point out that fancy amen.
That's a fancy amen, yes. Yes.
And if the paraclete, paraclito, you just remember, that's the Holy Spirit.
Right. Our second example this morning, O come, Emmanuel. The melody and the text of Conditor Alme have been together for a very long time, at least since the 9th century, and probably well before that. Although it is, I know from painful experience, it is only in the 10th century that we begin to have fully legible musical notation. In other words, so you know how high or low the notes are. The next question, okay, how did this hymn get into English? Now, at this point, there enters an important hymn book, a hymn book called Hymnal Noted. The first volume was published in 1851, so we're talking about mid-19th century. A second volume came out a little later, and they were both combined in 1856. This is a total of 210 hymns, mostly from medieval Latin sources. It was edited by a man named Thomas Helmore, and more important for us, it contained translations of the Latin hymns by John Mason Neale, which may be a familiar name to you. Neale was an Anglican priest and a prolific translator, among other things. This hymnal...
Okay, let's go to Visual 3. We should get onto Visual 3.
This hymnal noted, reflected the high church ideals of the Oxford movement, those of returning to antiquity, to the medieval church with all its mystery. Neale's translations introduced to English-speaking worshipers the rich repertory of Latin hymns, and their impact was enormous. Okay, we need to move on to Visual 3, and lo and behold, we have the Conditor Alme in English for the first time from Hymnal Noted, 1851. Now, I'm not saying that no English church folks sang in their own language before the mid-19th century. Of course, that's not true. There was an English psalter that came out about the same time as our prayer book did, and there were some hymns in that. Gave people plenty of material to sing about. We'll talk more about that next week. Returning to the visual now, we, first of all, we encounter a translation problem, of which there are many. For example, the Latin sidus, or siderum in this text, conditor alme siderum, means more than just a star. It also encompasses the sun, the moon, the planets, all the heavenly constellations and comets and meteors. But to sing, creator of the galaxies, or creator of the cosmos, that doesn't work. So he hit upon this beautiful stars of night, and so forth. As in our previous visual, you'll see we have a 4-line staff, square notation again, and the F clef, very similar to the Gregorian and Psalm notations of much earlier time, 12th, 13th century. And this, though, is what the people were to be singing from. So, you know, and we do some of that at St. Francis with the choir, too. That's Conditor Alme,
1851.
1851. Moving on to Visual 4. Now, Visual 4 is from an expansive, famous hymnal called Hymns Ancient and Modern. This was first published in 1861, that is to say about 10 years after our previous example. This was a monumental effort to pull together all the disparate hymnals used in English churches, including hymnal noted. It turned out to be a non-denominational, all-encompassing hymnal. It has gone through many editions. I have one from 1983 in the cellar with all those other hymnals and liturgical books. Hymns Ancient and Modern was so inclusive that by the end of the 19th century, it was being used by 3/4 of all the churches in England. Needless to say, it had an enormous influence on subsequent hymnals, such as the English hymnal of 1906 and subsequent hymnals.
By all churches, do you mean like non-conforming as well as Anglican? And
no,
Catholic,
I'm talking about Anglican churches, I think. But, yeah.
Well, hymnal noted was not, I mean, Hymns Ancient and Modern wasn't a denominational hymnal.
No, but
so we don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's an interesting.
Not sure, Brett.
I'm not sure. Yeah, right. Because there were lots of. My grandmother was a primitive Methodist.
Yeah. Well, you can't ask her whether she used the Hymns Ancient and Modern. But anyway, no, that's a good question to which I really don't know the answer. The Episcopal Church in America, of course, was greatly influenced also by Hymns Ancient and Modern. Now in this score, Visual 4, you'll notice it's very different. First of all, it's harmonized, okay, you've got chords there. So the idea of pure melody has been abandoned. Measured notes, okay, those look like a bunch of half notes. Bar lines, modern clefs, like the G and the F clef, and a key signature. Okay, one flat. So this is a very different looking score from the preceding. Oh yeah, yeah. An oddity is that the flag. If you look at the flags, the stems on the alto and bass notes, they're on the wrong side, but that's a trivial thing. And also notice the translation has changed. Hymns Ancient and Modern changed what Neil originally wrote.
Creator of the stars.
was
Creator of the Stars of Night.
Creator of the Stars of Night, and they've changed that, you see, to Creator of the Starry Height. That was among the changes that Hymns Ancient and Modern made. So that's all I think I want to say about Visual 4. So moving on to, you guessed it, Visual 5.
Bingo.
Now this should look familiar. This is taken right out of our very own hymnal, the hymnal 1982. The notation, you'll see, has returned to stemless notes. In other words, just note heads, no stem. They are round, though, rather than square. We have a key signature, all right, a G clef, familiar notation. And we have a 5-line staff rather than the 4. 5-line is what we're more used to. That all looks more familiar to us. So let's sing this, and you're encouraged to sing at home if you want.
This is, what did we decide?
We're singing verses 1, 3, and 6, I guess.
Right, and this accompaniment is a modern accompaniment by Bruce Nesbitt.
That's our first note. Okay, here we go. Creator of the stars of night, your people's everlasting light, O Christ, Redeemer of us all, we pray you hear us when we call. When this whole world drew on toward night, you came, but not in splendor bright, not as a monarch, but the child of Mary, blameless mother mild. To God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit, 3 in 1, praise, honor, might, and glory be, from age to age eternally. Now at this point,
I'm going to play an organ piece.
Lorna's going to play a short organ piece by Alec Rowley, who was a first half of 20th century composer. It's called Meditation on Conditor Alme, and if you were in church last Sunday, or tuned into church, you heard it as part of the end of the program.
And this is very, so this is very easy to follow the melody because I play it on the oboe. And it travels around. It goes from the soprano to my feet. And it goes to the left hand, etc. You'll be able to follow the melody very easily through the piece. Okay. If I can do this right, we'll be good. Second part, which is on Veni, Emmanuel. Okay, this is number 56 in our hymnal, O come, Emmanuel. This beloved and well-known Advent hymn, though considerably younger than Creator of the Stars of Night, has a more complex history, as you will see.
including several probably unanswerable questions. Okay, if we turn to visual 1. This is the beginning of the story of Veni Emmanuel. This is what you have there, if you could read it, is the so-called O antiphons, the great O antiphons, which inspired the verses of the hymn, O come, Emmanuel. This visual shows the text with English translations. These antiphons, which date back at least to the 8th century, have traditionally been used before and after Mary's song, the Magnificat, as a part of Vespers, that same office or non-mass service that we talked about before, on the 7 days leading up to Christmas. And in our hymnal, those days are very nicely noted, suggesting that people use those verses on those days. Okay. As for the text of Veni Emmanuel, it cannot be traced back further than maybe the late 16th century. We really don't know. But still, that would be roughly, 6 centuries more recent than the text of Untitled. So as I say, it's a much younger piece. As for the hymn tune, much of it appears to date from the 15th century, and I'll get to that momentarily. But that still makes it a lot more recent than the 9th century or earlier melody of Conditor Alme. So that's the O antiphons. Let's move on then to visual 2. This visual shows the earliest known appearance of the 5-verse version of the text. We're used to the longer version, and I'll say something about that later on, but the 5-verse version of the text, which was very common and which Neil actually used. This is taken from a book with a real tongue twister as a title. Let's see if I can get through it. These Salteriolum, Cancionum, Catholicarum. How's that? Anyway, that was a publication from 1710. It was the 7th or last edition of that great collection. That is not, however, this is not where Neil encountered the hymn. He got that from another collection, Thesaurus Hymnologicus, Hymnological Thesaurus, from 1844, well during his lifetime. And the Veni Emmanuel was included in that second volume of that. That was all edited by a man named Daniel, a German fellow. Okay, thanks to the Thesaurus, the life of the hymn was continued. It might have died out with the dying out of the Salteriorum, but it continued, and it's a good thing it did, because John Mason Neal encountered it in the 1844 edition, and then you know the rest of the story. That's how he came to know the hymn. That's how he made the translation. You will notice, before we leave visual 2, you'll notice there the refrain, Gaude, Gaude, Emmanuel. Okay, we sing rejoice, rejoice. This is an Advent, kind of a response, I guess, to the petitions of the Come, Emmanuel, the petitions of the previous. So take note of that. Okay, then I guess we can move on to visual 3. This is our most beautiful visual, and you can see there it's got beautiful colors. It's a beautiful manuscript. Notice it has red staff lines, black. Well, of course the notes are black, and the text. but it's got this big blue, what we call illuminated first letter of the text. Now, note that, okay, here we go again. The little clef indicates C, so this piece is going to start on D, and I guess, is it time to sing it?
No.
No, okay, we will sing it later.
On the next visual.
We'll sing it on the next
Do you need
visual.
to say anything more about this one before we move on?
Well, yes, I guess I want to talk about Mary Berry.
Mary Berry, that's
Yeah.
right.
A woman named Mary Berry, B-E-R-R-Y, who was also a religious, and she went under the religious name of Mother Thomas More, did some research and found in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris in 1966, found in a 15th century manuscript containing processional chants for burials, of all things. She found this melody, which was, the manuscript was associated with French Franciscan nuns, another connection with St. Francis, perhaps an order called the Order of St. Clare, or the Clares,
Of Mo.
in Mo, yeah, France. Okay, so that, anyway, that's just an example. We'll do the melody in a moment. But that's a beautiful manuscript. I guess they couldn't get it completely open, judging from how that looks. Okay, now
That's the next one.
The next one, yeah, visual 4. This visual, which includes more of the chant, you'll see that it makes the melody very clear. Okay. Oh, thank you, Brent. That's terrific. That's terrific. Because you can see the Latin text there, Bone Jesu Dulcis Cunctis, and so forth. And
Pro de Fulcis.
and then you can see that they're beseeching God for the dead, for the Fulcis. Okay, now if you follow I think you can see these notes.
These little black notes.
And you'll notice that the first phrase repeats. The second and third phrases occur once each, and then the melody on the second page of the visual goes off into some other melody. So it's only this first page that we're concerned with.
We're going to sing La La La.
Okay? Yeah, because you can hardly read this.
Okay.
Okay. No.
Okay.
Oh, da, 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 la, 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 and then it repeats. La, 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 and then the familiar la, 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 and then it goes off into something else. And it's funny because that little thing called a kustos, that little mark at the end of it, implies that the next note is da da dee da da, which it should be, but it isn't. So I don't know what happened here. Either the scribe made a mistake, or they just simply went into another melody. But obviously, this is the melody, and
It's about the dead.
Mother Thomas More was right. Entirely different text about the dead, rather than the coming of the manual.
This exonerated Helmut.
Oh yes, this discovery,
100 years later,
in a sense, exonerated Thomas Helmore, who was the musical editor of Hymnal Noted. Because for years people couldn't find this melody. He says at the top of I guess the next, when we get to it, he says it was from a missal in Lisbon, but nobody ever found it. So people for many, many years assumed that Thomas Helmore, the musical editor, had made up this melody. But with Mary Berry's discovery, now we don't have to worry about that. However, it could still, it seems to me, that it could still be possible that he provided the notes for rejoice, rejoice, the refrain. I haven't been able to track that down.
Nobody knows, seems to know.
So
that.
nobody really knows where that came from. But anyway, he didn't make up the melody we know and love. Okay, moving on. This is, again, from Hymnal Noted. You've already seen one score from that wonderful hymnal. This is from the second book, 1854. And it looks maybe a little more modern. It has these slur marks, which, of course, you didn't need in conditor because it's one note per syllable, what we call syllabic. But here you do have, you got more than one note on a syllable. So he does put the slurs in, which make it look a little bit modern. But notice at the top it says, from a French missal in the National Library of Lisbon. Nobody's been able to prove that. You'll notice that he wrote, draw nigh, not O come, Emmanuel. That was a change that hymns ancient and modern was to make. He wrote, what you can see here, draw nigh. Okay, from the beginning. And the most important thing to know about this visual is that this is the first time that these words and this music were put together. Okay, and it's 1854, and it's clearly, can we say, a marriage made in heaven. Obviously, this has become a tremendously popular and gratifying hymn to sing, and widely known. Okay, now we come to Visual 7. Now, this is from a later, the second edition of Hymns Ancient and Modern, 1875. And again, as we noticed with the Conditor Alme, this is very different. It looks very modern. It's harmonized, first of all. And it has bar lines, measure lines, in other words. It has measured rhythms, again, half notes, quarter notes, whole notes. The funny thing about this one, I thought, was, if you look at the bottom of the page, I don't know if you can see that, it's pretty small, but notice the dynamic marks off to the left of the text. They want you to sing, O come, Emmanuel, mezzo forte, and then pull way back, that mourns in lonely exile here. I shouldn't be making fun of it.
And then, rejoice!
And then forte, rejoice!
Double, and then double forte, rejoice.
Yeah, fortissimo. So we're not used to that. Our hymnals don't have dynamic indications, but I suppose that was all part of the Romantic approach. We're at the Blumen side of Romanticism in 1875, so I guess that was part of that. Anyway, kind of funny little footnote. Okay, now the next one is going to be, again, like the Clares. This is going to be relevant to St. Francis Church, and in fact, in a more dramatic way. What you have here, it's yellow because it was an old book. What you have here is from something called University Hymns. Okay, it was published in 1907 in New York, and it was edited by Horatio Parker and Harry Jepson. Parker, a composer and a professor at Yale, was, as many of you know, the father of Isabel Parker Semler, in whose memory the prie-dieu in the sacristy here is dedicated. A little plaque says so. And also Horatio Parker was also the grandfather of George Semler, who was the husband of Mary Semler. So we come down to something very, very relevant. Now, looking at this score, first of all, if you can read it, it's got the Latin, the English is down at the bottom of the second page. but it's got Latin. Why would that be? Well, university students at that time, around the turn of the 20th century, were expected to know Latin. They had to know how to read it and how to write it, in fact. It's hard to imagine today, but every now and then something peeks through. Both Harvard and Princeton universities still have one graduating senior give a commencement speech in Latin. So
Brent is not.
Brent, he knows about that. Yeah, Brent knows, having gone to Harvard, he knows about these customs. This is a remnant from when the whole ceremony would have been conducted entirely in Latin. So that's a very interesting thing, and I thank Lorna for coming up with that, university hymns. Okay, now the last but not least, we have arrived at, guess what, your own hymnal, the good old hymnal 1982. Now, notice that the 5-verse form that Neil and everybody else has been dealing with has been augmented now to 7. What Canon Douglas was the editor of the 1940 hymnal. If you're old enough, you'll remember that hymnal. Canon Douglas was a very highly educated man and a very good musician. He restored 2 of the verses which had been omitted from the going back to the O antiphons. Verses 2 and 7, the one about sapientia, about wisdom, and verse 7, O rex gentium, okay?
Which in the original O antiphons were verses 1 and 6, because this hymn starts with the December 23 and ends with December 23.
Yeah. Okay, so the O come, thou wisdom, and O come, desire of nations, have been restored, and I think have been somewhat reconceived and rewritten by Canon Douglas. Yeah. Anyway.
All right.
So we're going to sing the verses that were left out and have been restored. So we're going to sing verses 2, 7, and 8. And 8 is a repeat of 1, so we'll end with a great familiar text or tune.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, here we go. Oh, come, wisdom from on high, who orderest all things mightily. To us the path of knowledge show, and teach us in her ways to go. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Okay, verse 7. O come, desire of nations, bind in one the hearts of all mankind. Bid thou our sad divisions cease, and be thyself our King of peace. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. And the last was also the first. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Okay, this is the end of our presentation. We've got what?
I have my organ piece.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's not the end. It's not the end quite yet. I'm sorry, Lorna. Lorna's going to play a piece
That's a short piece by Gerald.
by Gerald Neer, who is exactly her age.
Right, I know. Think about it. It's scary.
There's no secret about that, I guess. They were both Gerald and Lorna were born in 1942, and he is one of her favorite composers. The relationship between them doesn't go any farther than that, as far as I know. Okay, so Lorna's going to play Veni Veni Emmanuel by Gerald Neer. And you want to say something about
Just
it?
the melody will be in the left hand. There are little interludes that have little, little sort of suggestions of what the melody is. When he gets to the rejoice, he does it in the octave first, and then he repeats it. And then the melody goes on from there.
Okay,
All right.
so Gerald Neer.
The right registration here. Okay. To me, that piece really denotes the longing of "Come, O come, Emmanuel," kind of a pleading longing.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so
Okay. Now what I said before is now true. This really is the end of our presentation, and we have time for
questions,
comments,
anything that you want to hear again, do again,
anything
see
you'd
again.
like to contribute would be welcome.
Thank you very much.
Well,
it was a wonderful presentation. We enjoyed it.
Well, it was a pleasure to do it. Thank you.
I have a comment to make about the seventh verse.
Yeah.
And in the song, it really struck a chord, pardon the pun, with the lyrics there.
Yes.
How poignant that is to what's going on today.
I know. Isn't that wonderful? Our sad divisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why. That's one of the verses I think that Canon Douglas may have had a hand in, because if you compare it with the original, it's rather different. Yeah, that one struck me too. Yeah, love that verse. And be our King of Peace. So he does bring in that
Rex Gentium.
He does bring in the Rex Gentium, the King of the Gentiles, from the original.
And you all know that Blue Christmas is all based. The Blue Christmas service on the 14th is rooted in the Jewish recipe. The root of Jesse, the Radix, is rooted in the old antiphons. It's based on that, right? And so I will actually be playing that piece plus another piece on Baby Emmanuel. That's part of the prologue.
And I guess we'll be using the verses.
And they'll be interspersed in the service.
Interspersed and binding together the service that Father Brent has devised. So this will be a theme that holds it all together. Not the old antiphons themselves, but the hymn, for which they were the inspiration.
So it's probably worth noting that the Episcopal hymnal on these two pieces took them back to chant, unaccompanied chant, especially. The two accompaniments in the 1982 hymnal are actually from two people that are still alive.
Yes, very much.
Dick Prue and Bruce Nesbitt.
Dick Prue has died.
Oh, that's right. But they're modern and sparse accompaniments. But these hymns could also be certainly sung a cappella.
Yeah.
And so, Brent, you should tell us a little bit about music in the monastery.
Yes, please.
What about it?
Well, what was the singing when you were tending the garden?
It was very, they did a lot of chant, just regular plain song, but it was rather conventional church music for the most part. There was an organ in the main monastery. Everything was straight prayer book and hymnal 1982. They spent a lot of time working on it. The choir was excellent, but it was to my untrained ear, it was nothing particularly fascinating musicologically. It was very standard church music. I mean, I recognize all the hymns and all that kind of thing, but they were just excellent singers.
Yes, I can imagine. Yeah.
Well, the most interesting part of this whole thing for us was digging into the past of Baby Emmanuel, which is such a complicated and has so many unanswered questions still. And of course, a lot of libraries were destroyed during the wars, so who knows what happened to manuscripts that might have whatever. Somebody may turn something up that figures out where Gaude came from.
Yeah. The one thing that was very clearly used in the monastic tradition, which relates to the O antiphons, is that the antiphons and that whole tradition of the antiphons during the offices. Now called a solemnity, like Christmas, Epiphany, the major holidays, used to be called a double first-class feast because there were two antiphons that were sung at the offices, so that's where the double part came from. But so the antiphons, and there's a whole other source of those. I mean, that's outside of the prayer book and hymnal world that are very traditional, so like the propers. But that was one thing that was definitely different, is that the use of the antiphons with the psalter.
Okay.
So in the we're really going to get next week into the real beginnings of congregational singing in the Reformation, and that's going to be that's another subject, because that's really what Brent asked us a few weeks ago. When did congregational singing really start? And that will be answered.
Right.
Thank you so much, Lorna and Carlton. It's been just really illuminating. And
well, I hope so.
Surge Illuminare.
It's
an in-joke.
I hope it has been illuminating and not Yeah, apparently. Well, you're still there, so you must. You didn't give up in a fit of boredom.
No, heavens.
Thank you for tuning in.
Good,
Really.
good, all right.
Anybody else have any comments or? Yeah. Okay.
All right, well, we will sign off.
Thank you, and God bless.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you very much for doing this for us. We appreciate it.
Well, it was our pleasure. It was it was a bit of work, to be frank.
Well, these things have a lot. They have a lot of background stuff and a lot of
things. I mean, I taught Gregorian chant and all for years, but I've been retired for 17, so there's been a lot of research done, and Lorna came up with some wonderful resources
there are a lot of
on
stuff
the internet.
now.
On the internet
a lot of facsimiles that are just downloadable.
So it really.
Okay, so great.
Great. Okay, thanks so much.
11:01.
Thanks for being
See you
with us.
next week.
Okay.
Amen.
Yep. God bless.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
God bless.